So where we are after 2 years of having been in schools and youth organizations and colleges is over at about halfway through the last year, we started paying attention to interventions. And we started reading up on what social psychologists are starting to do in the field of education. Brian Dickerson, along with Phil Zimbardo, with Phil's help really, has written something that we're calling Psychological Interventions to Transform Education. It's essentially a quasi-literature review. It's about 35 pages. It's going to be part of your packet. And I'd like Brian right now, who's the Associate Director of Education and Research for the Heroic Imagination Project, to say a few words about interventions themselves.
Sure.
Thanks, Brian.
Hello again. Again, my name is Brian. So the word intervention is actually not a word you hear used very commonly right now in this day and age. Usually when you think about an intervention, based on what you hear from your cultural knowledge, is a circle of chairs with your family member in it, and you walk in the door, you know, they're like, you have an alcohol problem, this is your intervention. So, and also, it has a kind of a negative connotation, the way that it's used, but when we talk about interventions, we talk about something that I feel is really positive. An intervention is an opportunity to create lasting positive change in the life of another individual, in an interpersonal interaction, or in a larger group or system. And interventions are all about finding effective ways to make these kind of changes using extremely limited resources. Like, people are busy, teachers have busy schedules, there's not a lot of room inside of the current system, but these skills are critical. And so we try to figure out, how can we go in for 45 minutes? How can we go in for 2 hours? How can we go in for only part of one semester? And actually present knowledge and skills to students in a way that's engaging, that will affect them, and that they'll be able to use not just the next day or the next year, but going forward, you know, to help them in their lives. And we have all kinds of limitations. We have limited time, we have limited money, we have limited training. But that being said, there is some fantastic research out there showing that a targeted intervention that centers around a psychological skill or process which is related to academic or social success can actually transform a student. For example, the work by Carol Dweck in Mindset has shown that, and briefly, mindset, and we'll go into this later, mindset is whether or not you really believe that you can change and grow, or whether or not the people around you can change and grow. And if you're a kid and you're in school, and you really just kind of naturally have learned that you can't change, that your intelligence specifically is locked in place, you're not motivated to try. Something challenging is a threat, because all it is an opportunity for you to realize that you are not talented, nor will you be talented. So kids with this naturally fixed mindset, and teachers with a naturally fixed mindset, they really don't put some of the effort into the motivational process to be able to really succeed. And Carol Dweck is a researcher at Stanford, and what she's found is that if you give students about in between 45 and 3 hours of mindset work, depending on which study we're talking about, that not only do these kids shift their mindset to really believe that they can apply themselves and learn and grow, but it sticks with them. It lasts. You know, 6 months later, a year later, they're doing better in school. They're attending more classes. They're getting into college. They're succeeding. So, you know, there's just one example of how, you know, an intervention as short as 45 minutes can actually change somebody's life outcome. So there's a lot of fantastic research out there on how interventions work. A lot of it has never been applied to an educational setting in a systemic way. A few studies out there, a few teachers, but never really tested at large, you know, how to apply some of these principles to the problems that we have. And there's also been some topics out there that just people haven't really tried to adapt to an intervention format. For example, you know, there are some really good mindset interventions out there, but that's not the only psychological process that's important for a student. Knowing how conformity works, when to be a bystander, when not to be, learning how to deal with prejudice, those are all important topics and important psychological processes that affect students. And right now, at least in my estimation of the field, there are not good interventions out there for these topics. But the logic of how interventions work, the logic of how you change someone's awareness, of how you build a skill, of how you generate, the understanding that in a certain situation I tend to do that, that's consistent from topic to topic. So we feel that we have actually helped to take a step forward with some of these interventions and combine some techniques and add to some techniques and supplement some research that makes them more effective. And we've also tried to design some interventions for topics that we feel just don't really have good ones out there. So you're going to get to help us in this process. We've come a long way in the last couple of years. We think we have a really good method, but there is no perfect method for every classroom, for every student and every teacher. Every child is different. Every classroom has unique aspects to it. So it's our goal not just to be able to, in a laboratory setting, or just, internally as an organization, to be able to run some of these interventions, but to be able to take students and teachers and passionate individuals out in the world and train them how to do what we do, with the ability to customize their, the material for the needs of their environment to really get some of these long-term changes. So we think we have an approach that's going to be effective, but you're going to help us find out. You're going to help us develop our material. You're going to help us get feedback. You're going to help us evaluate the data and see whether or not we're heading in the right direction. So this is exciting. We have an opportunity here to help show people how to transform education, to demonstrate to teachers and educators and administrators how a few minutes differently, or even just a difference in word choice, can dramatically impact students in a positive way that lasts. So I just want to thank you all for being here. This is something that I'm personally very passionate about, and I'm excited about the opportunity. I think that we are at the cutting edge of the field in trying to figure out how to solve some of these greater social issues that really grip education today. And thank you for joining us.
Any questions for Brian? It'd be really good to have a little bit of interaction. Any questions for Brian on?
We'll make you ask them later.
Yes, yes, Julie.
Brian, what drew you to the organization?
Actually, surprisingly similar to what the question Clint asked. I was at the WPA convention in 2010, and I met Phil Zimbardo. He was giving a talk about hypnotism. It wasn't relevant to what I was interested in talking to him about. But at the end of the session, he said, "Does anybody have any questions?" And I basically almost asked what Clint did when the students were with him the other day, is that we have all this great knowledge about this Stanford Prison experiment, the Milgram experiment, all of these, Abu Ghraib, all of these situations in which we understand variables in the environment, variables in the system are impacting people, making them less tolerant, more mean, frustrated, nasty. But what do we know about how to take the exact same process and turn it on its head? How can we take the same variables that are making people more negative and structure their environment so they're naturally more positive, more engaged, more interested in being empathetic? And he's like, well, actually I just started this organization who's really interested in dealing with this topic. Would you like a job? And I was like, yeah, that would be fantastic. And then I got hooked up with Clint, and we started to get some of the very early research and some of the very early groundwork laid out. And for the last couple of years, we've really been testing and refining that process. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
And I want to say that Brian was talking about Carol Dweck's work and a growth mindset. A major breakthrough came a couple of years ago when Brian helped to figure out that we could use that very same assessment tool or the framework for a growth mindset for individuals to social situations. And as a result, Brian developed an assessment instrument that he will go over later in the day. So that was a big breakthrough. Can you have a growth mindset about challenging social situations? What can you do about it, those situations? And can you change your mindset? Very important for all young people. I think especially so for low-income youth. So that was a major breakthrough on our in our project a couple of years ago.
Can I say
and yes.
Yeah, one more thought on that is I'm really excited specifically about the way we deal with mindset. Traditional mindset interventions are really a scientific argument about neuroplasticity. Your brain keeps changing the older you get. It can make new connections. Therefore, learning is possible. And that works. That works really well. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't teach kids to evaluate their own mindset, to be able to decide whether or not they're comfortable with how their mindset plays out, to notice the variance from mindset to mindset, from situation to situation, and from construct to construct. You might naturally have a very developed growth mindset about your intelligence, but maybe your relationship skills or your attractiveness or whatever, you don't feel the same way. And if you can learn to see both where you naturally do things one way and naturally do things the other, and you can actually suggest to students a strategy for learning to become more aware of their mindset, decide for themselves where they'd like to change it and the plan to do so, it gives the control over to them. It's no longer a passive intervention where I've done something to you or I've created an environment that has transformed you. I've taught you how to begin to appreciate something about yourself that you can decide how to use. You can decide what skill to build. You can decide to go forward how to go forward. So I'm really excited about all of our interventions, especially the way we deal with making the students themselves aware of these processes, deciding for themselves what change to cultivate, what strategy to pursue, but arming them with specific strategies from research and the support they need to be able to actually make these changes in a healthy, productive, and progressive way. So I love the mindset intervention. I would like to talk about it more later.